The automatic doors of San Francisco International Airport slid open with their familiar whoosh, and Margaret Chen stepped inside, pulling her small rolling suitcase behind her. At 62 years old, she had long ago stopped dressing to impress anyone. Today, like most days, she wore her favorite pair of faded jeans, comfortable sneakers that had seen better days, and a simple gray cardigan over a white cotton shirt. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried an old leather bag that had traveled with her for over a decade. To anyone watching, she looked like a grandmother heading home after visiting family, maybe a retired teacher. Perhaps someone who had saved up for months to afford this trip. Nobody would guess that this unassuming woman had built one of the most successful airlines in the country from the ground up, starting with a single plane and a dream 30 years ago. Margaret preferred it that way. She had learned long ago that you see the real world more clearly when people don't know who you are. When you're invisible, people show you their true colors. And after 3 decades in the airline business, she knew that the truth always mattered more than appearances. She made her way through the bustling terminal, weaving between rushing business people in expensive suits and families juggling suitcases and excited children. The airport smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies, a scent she had come to associate with both adventure and homecoming. Even after all these years and countless flights, she still felt a small flutter of excitement before boarding a plane. The Pacific Airways check-in area came into view, its blue and white logo gleaming under the bright airport lights. Margaret had designed that logo herself, back when she was working 18-hour days and sleeping in her office. She had wanted something that represented both the sky and the ocean, something that spoke of journeys and possibilities. Looking at it now still filled her with pride, though she rarely admitted it to anyone. The check-in counter was moderately busy. Margaret joined the line behind a young couple arguing quietly about their seating arrangements and a businessman who kept checking his watch with increasing irritation. She didn't mind waiting. In fact, she often learned the most about her airline service during these small moments that most executives never bothered to experience. When her turn came, she approached the counter with a friendly smile. The young man behind the counter was tall and thin, probably in his mid-20s, with carefully styled hair and a name tag that read Trevor. He was typing something on his computer and didn't look up immediately. "Good morning," Margaret said pleasantly, placing her boarding pass and identification on the counter. Trevor glanced up briefly, his eyes doing a quick sweep of her appearance before returning to his screen. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight tightening around his mouth that Margaret had seen countless times before. It was the look people gave when they decided you weren't important enough to warrant their full attention. "Flying to Seattle today?" he asked, his tone flat and professional but lacking any real warmth. He picked up her boarding pass with 2 fingers as if it might be dirty. "Yes, that's right," Margaret replied, keeping her voice cheerful. She watched his face as he scanned her ticket, curious to see how he would handle the transaction. Trevor's eyebrows shot up and he looked at the boarding pass more closely. Then he turned to his computer screen, clicking his mouse several times. His frown deepened with each click. "There seems to be some kind of error with your ticket," he said, finally making direct eye contact with her. His voice carried a hint of suspicion now. "Oh, what kind of error?" Margaret asked, tilting her head slightly. "It shows you have a first-class seat," Trevor said, emphasizing the words first class as if they were particularly significant. "That can't be right." Margaret felt a familiar heaviness settle in her chest. "Here we go again," she thought. "Actually, that is correct. I purchased a first-class ticket." Trevor let out a small laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. It was more like a sound of disbelief mixed with condescension. He exchanged a quick look with his colleague at the next counter, a woman who looked over with interest, her penciled eyebrows raised. "Ma'am," Trevor said, his voice taking on the slow, careful tone people use when they think they're speaking to someone who doesn't understand something obvious. "First-class tickets are quite expensive. Are you sure you didn't maybe book a regular economy seat and get confused?" Margaret's smile didn't waver, though she felt a spark of frustration kindle in her belly. "I'm quite sure. I specifically selected seat 2A, first class, when I made my reservation online 3 days ago." Trevor clicked his mouse a few more times, making an exaggerated show of studying his screen. "Well, I'm seeing here that there might have been some kind of system glitch. These things happen sometimes. What probably occurred is that you were accidentally upgraded, but you don't actually qualify for first-class seating." "I don't qualify?" Margaret repeated, keeping her voice neutral. Could you explain what that means? Look, Trevor said, leaning forward slightly and lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. The first-class cabin is reserved for our premium customers. You know, business travelers, frequent flyers with elite status, that sort of thing. I'm sure you understand. Margaret understood perfectly. She understood that this young man had taken one look at her comfortable clothes and gray hair and decided she didn't belong in first class. She understood that he was making assumptions based on nothing more than her appearance, and she understood that this was exactly the kind of problem she had been trying to eliminate from her airline for years. I see, she said calmly. And what would you like me to do? I'm going to reassign you to an economy seat, Trevor said, already typing on his keyboard. Let's see what we have available. Here we go. Seat 32B. Middle seat, but it's near the back, so you'll be close to the restrooms. That should work out fine for you. The casual dismissiveness in his tone was breathtaking. Margaret watched as he reached for a new boarding pass, ready to print out her reassignment without even getting her agreement. She placed her hand gently on the counter. I would like to speak with your supervisor, please, she said quietly. Trevor's hand paused over the printer. He looked up at her with barely concealed annoyance. Ma'am, I'm trying to help you here. The flight is boarding in 40 minutes. If you make a fuss about this, you might miss your flight entirely. Just take the economy seat and next time make sure you book the right ticket. Nevertheless, Margaret said, her voice still calm but with a thread of steel running through it now, I would like to speak with your supervisor. Trevor rolled his eyes so dramatically that the woman at the next counter actually snickered. Fine, he said with an exaggerated sigh. But you're just going to hear the same thing from her. He picked up a phone and pressed a button, turning slightly away from Margaret as he spoke. Hey, Donna. Yeah, I need you at counter 3. Got a difficult customer situation. He hung up without saying goodbye and turned back to Margaret with a tight smile. She'll be right here. Margaret nodded and stepped slightly to the side, not wanting to hold up the line that was forming behind her. The businessman who had been behind her moved to the next counter, shooting her an irritated look as if this was somehow her fault. She met his eyes briefly and saw no sympathy there, only impatience. While she waited, Margaret observed Trevor helping the next customer, a woman in her 30s wearing designer sunglasses and carrying what was clearly an expensive handbag. The difference in his demeanor was striking. His voice was warmer, his smile genuine, his movements more attentive. When the woman mentioned she had hoped for an upgrade, Trevor immediately began checking his computer with enthusiasm. Let me see what I can do for you, he said brightly, his fingers flying over the keyboard. You know what? You're in luck. I can move you up to premium economy at no extra charge. Would you like that? The woman accepted with delight, and Trevor printed her new boarding pass with a flourish, wishing her an excellent flight. Margaret watched the entire interaction with interest, mentally adding it to the growing list of observations she had been collecting over the past year. A woman in a navy blue blazer approached the counter, her expression already set in professional annoyance. The name tag on her lapel identified her as Donna Patterson, duty manager. She was probably in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and makeup applied with precision. Everything about her posture suggested she was someone who took pride in handling problems efficiently, which usually meant making them disappear as quickly as possible. What seems to be the issue here? Donna asked, directing the question more at Trevor than at Margaret. Trevor straightened up, clearly relieved to have backup. This passenger is claiming she has a first-class ticket, but there's obviously been some kind of mistake. I was trying to reassign her to economy, but she insisted on speaking with you. Donna turned to Margaret for the first time, her eyes doing that same quick assessment Trevor had done earlier. Margaret could practically see the judgment forming behind those carefully made-up eyes. The duty manager's expression shifted from professional concern to barely concealed dismissal in less than 3 seconds. May I see your boarding pass and ID, please? Donna asked, her tone already suggesting she expected to find exactly what Trevor had told her. Margaret handed over both documents without a word. She had been through enough of these situations to know that sometimes silence spoke louder than arguments. Let people reveal themselves, her father had always told her. Give them enough rope and they'll show you who they really are. Donna examined the documents with exaggerated care, holding them up to the light as if checking for forgeries. She tapped a few keys on Trevor's computer, her frown deepening with each keystroke. Finally, she set the documents down on the counter with a soft thud that somehow managed to sound disapproving. "Mrs. Chen," she began, and Margaret noticed she didn't bother to check whether it was Mrs. or Ms. "I can see that according to our system you do have a first-class ticket. However, I'm also seeing several red flags that suggest this may have been a booking error." "Red flags?" Margaret asked, genuinely curious about what possible red flags there could be. "Our first-class cabin is designed for business professionals and elite travelers," Donna explained, her voice taking on that same condescending tone Trevor had used. "Your booking doesn't show any frequent flyer status. No corporate account, no travel agency booking. Nothing that would typically be associated with a first-class purchase." Margaret felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, though she kept it carefully controlled. "I see. And are those things required to purchase a first-class ticket?" Donna's jaw tightened slightly. "Of course not. Anyone can purchase any ticket. But what I'm trying to explain to you is that there may have been a system error. These things happen with online bookings sometimes. Perhaps you accidentally clicked the wrong option." "I'm quite comfortable with online booking systems," Margaret said mildly. "I've been using them for many years." "I'm sure you are," Donna replied, though her tone suggested she believed exactly the opposite. "But the fact remains that we need to verify this is a legitimate first-class purchase. Do you have the credit card you used to make this purchase?" Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet, selecting one of several credit cards inside. She handed it to Donna without comment. It was a plain silver card, nothing flashy, though anyone who knew banking would recognize it as a high-limit platinum card. Donna barely glanced at it before handing it back. "This doesn't prove you purchased this specific ticket with this specific card. Do you have a receipt? A confirmation email, perhaps?" "I can pull up my confirmation email," Margaret said, reaching for her phone. "That won't be necessary," Donna interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Here's what I think happened. I think you may have booked an economy ticket and somehow the system glitched and assigned you to first class. It's an honest mistake, and these things do happen. What I'm going to do is honor your original economy fare and get you seated in the main cabin. That's more than fair, don't you think?" Margaret tilted her head slightly, studying the duty manager's face. "And if I insist that I purchased a first-class ticket and would like to sit in the seat I paid for?" Donna's professional smile grew thinner. "Then I would have to ask you to step aside while I investigate this further, which could take considerable time. Your flight board's in 35 minutes. If you miss your flight because you're being difficult about a seating assignment, that would be unfortunate." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Margaret felt her pulse quicken slightly. Not with anxiety, but with that particular mixture of disappointment and determination she had felt many times before. This was her airline. These were her employees. And this was exactly the kind of behavior she had spent years trying to root out. Before Margaret could respond, a commotion at the counter next to them drew everyone's attention. A man in an expensive tailored suit was speaking rapidly to Trevor's colleague, gesturing at his phone with obvious frustration. "I don't understand how this could happen," the man was saying, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire check-in area. "I specifically selected seat 3C first class window seat. Now you're telling me I've been moved to economy? This is completely unacceptable. Do you know who I am?" Donna's head snapped toward the disturbance like a hunting dog catching a scent. Without a word of excuse to Margaret, she moved swiftly to the next counter, her entire demeanor transforming as she approached the well-dressed man. "Sir, I'm so sorry for this inconvenience," Donna gushed, her voice suddenly warm and syrupy. "I'm the duty manager, and I'm going to personally resolve this for you right away. There must have been a system error. Let me take a look at what happened." Margaret watched the interaction with fascination. The contrast was so stark it would have been almost comical if it weren't so troubling. Donna's fingers flew over the keyboard, her face a mask of concerned concentration. Within 30 seconds, she was smiling triumphantly. "I've found the problem, sir. I apologize for our error. I'm reinstating your first-class seat right now, and I'm also going to upgrade you to our premium first-class section as an apology for this inconvenience. Is there anything else I can do to make your flight more comfortable?" The businessman's anger melted away like snow in sunshine. "Well, thank you. That's more like it. I appreciate you handling this so efficiently." "It's absolutely my pleasure, sir," Donna replied, printing out his new boarding pass with a flourish. "Have a wonderful flight, and again, please accept our sincere apologies." The man took his boarding pass and strode away, already pulling out his phone to make a call. Donna watched him go with a satisfied smile before turning back to where Margaret still stood at Trevor's counter. The warm, accommodating expression vanished instantly, replaced by the same cool professionalism she had shown before. Now, where were we? Donna asked, as if the interruption had been insignificant. Ah, yes, we were discussing your seating situation. We were, Margaret agreed quietly. I noticed you were able to resolve that gentleman's first-class seating issue quite quickly. Donna's eyes narrowed slightly. That was a different situation entirely. That passenger is one of our elite frequent flyers. He flies with us at least twice a week for business. Of course we're going to prioritize his concerns. I see, Margaret said. So the ability to sit in a first-class seat you've purchased depends on how often you fly? That's not what I said, Donna replied, her voice sharpening. What I'm saying is that we know our regular customers. We know when something is genuinely wrong versus when there's been a booking error. And you've determined that my booking is an error based on what, exactly? Margaret asked, keeping her tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. Donna's patience was clearly wearing thin. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as if speaking to a child who wasn't quite understanding a simple concept. Ma'am, let me be frank with you. First-class tickets on this route cost over $1,200. Economy tickets cost around $200. That's a significant price difference. In my experience, when someone shows up at the counter dressed, she paused, her eyes flickering over Margaret's outfit, casually, and claiming to have a first-class ticket without any of the usual indicators, 9 times out of 10, it's a mistake. And the 10th time? Margaret asked softly. The 10th time, it's someone who booked something they can't actually afford and are hoping we won't check, Donna said bluntly. The professional mask had slipped now, revealing the assumptions underneath. Look, I'm trying to save you from embarrassment. If you boarded that flight and there was an issue with payment, or if this ticket was purchased with someone else's information, it would be much more uncomfortable to deal with it once you're on the plane. I'm giving you a chance to accept an economy seat with no questions asked and no problems. Margaret felt something cold settle in her stomach. It wasn't anger exactly. She had been angry before, many times, at many injustices. This was different. This was profound disappointment. This was the feeling of seeing something you built with your own hands being misused in exactly the way you had tried to prevent. I appreciate your concern, Margaret said, her voice steady. But I assure you that my ticket was purchased legitimately with my own credit card. I can afford it, and I would like to sit in the seat I paid for. Donna straightened up, her expression hardening into something that looked almost like satisfaction, as if Margaret had finally confirmed exactly what she had suspected all along. Then I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while I contact our fraud prevention department. This will take some time to verify. How much time? Margaret asked. Could be 30 minutes. Could be an hour. Depends on how quickly they can. Margaret nodded slowly, as if considering this information carefully. I understand. Would you mind if I made a quick phone call before I decide? It will only take a moment. Donna glanced at her watch with obvious impatience. Make it fast. You're running out of time. Thank you, Margaret said simply. She stepped away from the counter, moving toward the window where she would be out of direct earshot but still visible. She could feel the eyes of the gate agents following her, could sense their certainty that she was about to give up or perhaps call someone to come rescue her from this embarrassing situation. Margaret pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she wanted. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Richard Chen speaking. Richard, it's Mom, Margaret said quietly. Mom, are you at the airport? Is everything okay? Her son's voice immediately shifted from professional to concerned. As Pacific Airways' chief operating officer, he could probably hear something in her tone that told him this wasn't just a casual call. I'm at San Francisco International, Gate 34. I'm fine, but I think we have a situation here that needs your attention. There was a brief pause. Richard knew his mother well enough to understand that when she said a situation, it was something significant. What kind of situation? The kind where I'm being denied boarding to a first-class seat I purchased because the gate staff have decided I don't look like I belong there, Margaret said matter-of-factly. I think it might be time for one of those training conversations we've been discussing. She could hear Richard's sharp intake of breath. You're kidding me. Please tell me you're kidding. I wish I was. The duty manager just told me that in her experience, people dressed casually who claim to have first-class tickets are usually making a mistake or trying to commit fraud. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Richard said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Don't go anywhere. I'll be here, Margaret assured him. Oh, and Richard? Don't come in too hot. This needs to be a teaching moment, not just a punishment. I make no promises, Richard muttered. I'll see you soon. Margaret ended the call and slipped her phone back into her bag. When she turned around, she found Donna watching her with an expression that somehow managed to be both suspicious and dismissive. Make your decision? Donna asked as Margaret approached the counter again. I've decided to wait, Margaret said pleasantly. Someone is coming to help me sort this out. Donna's eyebrow arched. Someone is coming? Ma'am, unless you have a travel agent who can somehow verify your ticket in the next 20 minutes, there's really nothing anyone can do. I've explained the situation. These are the rules. I understand, Margaret replied. Nevertheless, I'd like to wait. Suit yourself, Donna said with a shrug. But don't blame me when you miss your flight. Trevor, help the next customer. Trevor eagerly waved forward the next person in line, a college-age kid with a backpack covered in travel patches. Margaret noticed that Trevor's tone with this young traveler was professional but cool. Nothing like the warmth he had shown the well-dressed businesswoman earlier. The pattern was consistent, at least. Margaret moved to one of the seats in the gate area, settling in to wait. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. Though she wasn't really reading anything, she was observing, watching, taking mental notes about everything happening around her. At the counter, Donna and Trevor were now speaking in low voices, occasionally glancing in her direction. Donna pulled out her phone and appeared to be texting someone, probably warning her superiors about a difficult passenger situation. Trevor kept shaking his head, clearly enjoying the drama. The other passengers in the gate area had largely returned to their own business, though a few still cast curious looks Margaret's way. The elderly couple she had noticed earlier had taken seats across from her. The woman leaned over and spoke softly. Excuse me, dear. Are you all right? We couldn't help but notice the trouble at the counter. Margaret smiled warmly at her. I'm fine, thank you for asking. Just a misunderstanding that's being sorted out. These airlines, the old man grumbled. They make everything so complicated these days. In my day, you bought a ticket and you got on the plane. Simple as that. Harold, hush, his wife said, patting his arm. But she smiled at Margaret sympathetically. We're flying economy ourselves. Can't afford those fancy first-class seats on our retirement. But if you paid for it, you should get it. That's only fair. That's what I think too, Margaret agreed. She chatted with the couple for a few minutes, learning they were flying to Seattle to visit their new granddaughter. Their names were Grace and Harold, and they had been married for 43 years. They were exactly the kind of passengers Margaret had built her airline for, regular people traveling for the important moments in their lives. 15 minutes passed. Then 18. Margaret checked her watch. The flight would start boarding in 12 minutes. She saw Donna glancing at the clock too, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The duty manager clearly thought she had won this standoff, that Margaret would either give up or miss her flight. Then the atmosphere in the gate area shifted subtly. Margaret noticed it before she saw the cause. People's postures changed, became more alert. Conversations paused mid-sentence. All heads turned toward the escalator. Richard Chen appeared at the top of the escalator, and even from a distance, his body language radiated purpose and authority. He was 45 years old, tall like his father had been, wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit. His face was set in an expression Margaret recognized from his childhood, the look he got when someone had broken a rule and was about to face consequences. But Richard wasn't alone. Next to him was James Morrison, the regional airport manager for Pacific Airways. James was a bit older, mid-50s with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses. He had worked for Pacific Airways for 22 years, rising through the ranks from baggage handler to his current position. Margaret knew him well. James was a good man, thorough and fair, and from the deep red flush spreading across his face, he was also extremely upset about what he had just been told. The two men walked directly toward Gate 34, their purposeful stride causing other travelers to step aside instinctively. Margaret remained seated, watching the scene unfold. She saw the exact moment when Donna noticed them approaching. The duty manager's confident expression flickered, then froze as recognition dawned. Trevor saw them next. His face went pale so quickly Margaret actually felt a moment of concern for the young man's health. He grabbed Donna's arm, but the duty manager brushed him off, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for battle. Richard and James reached the gate area. Richard's eyes found his mother immediately, and Margaret saw relief flash across his face when he confirmed she was all right. Then his attention shifted to the check-in counter and his expression hardened again. James Morrison spoke first, his voice carrying across the gate area with practiced authority. "Donna Patterson. Trevor Mills. I need to speak with both of you immediately." Donna stepped forward and Margaret had to admire her composure, even if it was built on completely misplaced confidence. "Mr. Morrison, I'm glad you're here. We have a passenger who's been insisting she has a first-class ticket when there are clear indicators of a booking error. I've been following protocol to verify the purchase before allowing boarding." "Protocol," James repeated, and the single word somehow conveyed volumes of disgust. "You think you were following protocol?" "Yes, sir," Donna said, though a hint of uncertainty had crept into her voice. "In situations where there are red flags about a purchase, we're supposed to verify before allowing passengers to board, especially in premium cabins." Richard had moved to stand next to James, and now he spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, controlled, but it cut through the ambient airport noise like a knife. "And what red flags did you identify exactly?" Trevor, still standing behind the counter, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Donna glanced at him, then back at James and Richard, clearly trying to understand the dynamics of this confrontation. Why had the regional manager brought someone else? Who was this man in the expensive suit who spoke with such authority? The passenger had no frequent flyer status, no corporate booking, and the purchase pattern was unusual, Donna said, reciting what was clearly a memorized list from some training manual. "These are indicators we're trained to watch for." "I see," Richard said. "And when a well-dressed businessman had a similar issue just a few minutes ago, did you apply the same rigorous verification process?" Donna's eyes widened slightly. "That was different. That passenger is a known frequent flyer. I recognized him from previous flights. So your verification process is based on whether someone looks familiar to you, whether they're dressed in a way you approve of, whether they meet your personal criteria for who belongs in first class." Richard's voice remained calm, but each question landed like a hammer blow. "That's not... I didn't mean..." Donna stammered, finally losing some of her composure. James held up his hand and Donna fell silent. "The ragey enough for what?" Trevor had sunk into his chair as if his legs could no longer support him. His face had gone from pale to a grayish color that suggested he might actually be sick. Donna stood frozen. Her carefully maintained professional composure shattered completely. James Morrison looked like he wanted to say something, probably to order both employees to his office immediately, but Margaret raised her hand slightly. The gesture was small, but James recognized it and fell silent. This was Margaret's moment, and he knew better than to interfere. "I think," Margaret said, her voice still quiet but carrying clearly through the now completely silent gate area, "that we should discuss this somewhere more private. However, before we do that, I'd like to say something here in front of everyone." She turned slightly, addressing not just Donna and Trevor, but the entire gate area. Passengers who had been pretending not to watch now openly stared. The elderly couple, Grace and Harold, were leaning forward in their seats. The young mother had stopped trying to manage her children and was listening intently. Even the businessman who had been helped so efficiently earlier had returned to the gate and was watching from near the windows. "My name is Margaret Chen, and I started Pacific Airways 30 years ago with one plane and a dream," she began. That dream wasn't just about flying people from one place to another. It was about treating every single person who walked through our doors with dignity and respect. It was about understanding that you can't tell someone's story by looking at them. You can't measure a person's worth by their clothes or their jewelry or the way they style their hair. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The gate area was so quiet that the distant sound of announcements from other gates seemed loud in comparison. "I've been standing here for the past 45 minutes being told that I don't look like I belong in first class. That my ticket must be a mistake because people who dress the way I do don't purchase expensive seats. That I should be grateful for any seat at all. And I've been watching while other passengers who looked more affluent, were treated with immediate courtesy and respect." Donna made a small sound, almost like a whimper, but Margaret continued without looking at her. But here's what concerns me most. It's not about me. I'll be fine. I can handle being treated poorly, though I shouldn't have to. What concerns me is all the other passengers who don't have my name or my authority. What about the retired teacher who saved for months to buy a first-class ticket for a trip of a lifetime? What about the small business owner who works 2 jobs and finally treated herself to comfort on a long flight? What about anyone who doesn't fit someone's narrow idea of what a first-class passenger should look like? She finally turned back to Donna and Trevor, and both employees looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. I saw you help that businessman immediately, with warmth and efficiency, Margaret said directly to Donna. And I've been watching you. Trevor, treat different passengers with different levels of courtesy all morning. You smiled at the woman with the designer handbag. You barely acknowledged the college student. You rolled your eyes at the elderly gentleman who was having trouble with his boarding pass. Trevor opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it again. There was no defense he could offer because it was all true. This isn't about one bad interaction, Margaret continued. This is about a pattern. This is about the culture we've allowed to develop, where people make snap judgments based on appearance, where assumptions replace actual customer service, where protocol becomes an excuse to treat people as suspicious rather than as valued customers. Grace, the elderly woman from across the gate area, stood up suddenly. Her voice was trembling but clear. Ma'am, I just want to say thank you. My husband and I have flown your airline for 15 years. We're not fancy people, never have been. And you're right. Sometimes the way we're treated makes us feel small, like we should apologize for being on the plane at all. It's nice to hear someone say what you just said. Margaret smiled at her warmly. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for choosing to fly with us for so many years. You're exactly the kind of passenger we should be honoring every single day. Richard had been standing silently through all of this, but now he stepped forward. Mom, maybe we should take this conversation somewhere more private now. In a moment, Margaret said. She looked at James. Do we have a conference room available? Yes, of course, James said immediately. Just down the corridor. Good. James, I'd like you to join us. Richard, you as well. And Donna and Trevor. She paused. But first I need to address something else. She turned to the gate agent who had been working the counter next to Trevor, the woman who had been watching the entire drama unfold with unconcealed interest. What's your name? The woman looked startled to be addressed. Rachel, ma'am. Rachel Vega. Rachel, I noticed you helped reassign that businessman to premium first class. Did you process that upgrade? Rachel nodded nervously. Yes, ma'am. Donna authorized it. And when Donna was dealing with me, you were listening to the entire conversation. Is that correct? Rachel glanced at Donna, then back at Margaret. Yes, ma'am. Did anything about that conversation concern you? Did anything seem wrong to you? There was a long pause. Rachel's internal struggle was visible on her face. She was clearly weighing her loyalty to a colleague against the truth. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought maybe Donna was being a little harsh, but she's my supervisor, and I figured she knew what she was doing. I didn't want to question her in front of a passenger. Margaret nodded slowly. I understand. Thank you for being honest. She looked around at the other passengers. Does anyone else have any comments or concerns about their experiences with Pacific Airways? Now would be an excellent time to share them. There was an uncomfortable silence. Then the young mother with the toddler and baby raised her hand tentatively. Margaret walked over to her. What's your name? Margaret asked kindly. Amy. Amy Rodriguez. The woman shifted the baby on her hip nervously. I wanted to say that traveling with kids is really stressful. And sometimes the way airline staff look at you when you board with children makes you feel like you're already doing something wrong before you even sit down. Like you're bothering everyone just by existing. I'm sorry you felt that way, Margaret said sincerely. What would make the experience better for you? Amy seemed surprised to be asked. Just maybe a smile, maybe some understanding that I'm doing my best. I always try to keep my kids quiet and well-behaved, but they're little. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they need to move around. A little patience would mean everything. That's exactly the kind of feedback we need, Margaret said. Thank you, Amy. The college student who had checked in earlier spoke up without being called on. I'm flying home for my grandmother's funeral. I could only afford the cheapest ticket, and I'm flying standby because it was all I could manage. The guy at the counter made me feel like I was lucky to even be considered for a seat. Like I should be grateful for whatever scraps the airline decided to throw my way. His voice cracked slightly, and Margaret saw the grief and stress visible on his young face. She walked over to him. "What's your name, son?" "Daniel. Daniel Wolf." "Daniel, I'm very sorry for your loss," Margaret said gently. "And I'm sorry that at a time when you're dealing with grief, you had to deal with being treated poorly by my airline. That's not acceptable. James, please make sure Daniel is moved to first class for his flight today, no charge." Daniel's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I can't. I mean, that's too much. It's not too much. It's what should have happened in the first place. Someone with compassion should have seen a young man in distress and offered kindness." She looked at James. "Can you take care of that?" "Absolutely," James said, already pulling out his phone. One by one, other passengers began sharing their experiences. Not everyone had complaints, but those who did spoke of small indignities, casual dismissals, moments where they felt judged or found wanting. Margaret listened to each one, really listened, and made mental notes. Richard was doing the same, she noticed. His phone out as he typed key points. Finally, when the sharing seemed to have run its course, Margaret turned back to the check-in counter where Donna and Trevor still stood, looking like they wished they could disappear. "All right," Margaret said. "Now we can have that private conversation. James, lead the way." The group moved toward the corridor, Donna and Trevor walking as if to their execution. But before they left the gate area, Margaret paused and turned to the waiting passengers one more time. "Thank you all for your honesty today. Your feedback is invaluable, and I promise you it will lead to real changes. For those of you flying with us today, I hope you have a safe and pleasant journey. And please know that what you saw here today is not how Pacific Airways is supposed to operate. We're going to do better." There was a smattering of applause as the group walked away. Margaret heard Grace's voice calling out, "You're a good person, Ms. Chen," and she smiled despite the heavy feeling in her chest. Trevor finally found his voice, though it shook when he spoke. "Ms. Chen, I know there's probably nothing I can say that will make this better, but I want you to know that I feel terrible. I was wrong. I made assumptions based on how you looked, and that was completely unprofessional." "At least you're being honest," Margaret acknowledged. "That's a start. But Trevor, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about me being offended or having my feelings hurt. This is about the fundamental values of our company being violated. When you treat passengers differently based on their appearance, you're not just being rude. You're actively damaging the trust that people place in our airline." She walked slowly around the table, not pacing but moving thoughtfully as she spoke. "Let me tell you a story. When I started this airline 30 years ago, I was a single mother with a business degree and a dream. I went to banks to ask for loans, and do you know what happened? They looked at me, saw a woman, saw someone without connections or family money, and they turned me down. Every single one of them." Richard smiled slightly. He had heard this story before, but it never got old. "They made assumptions about me based on what they saw," Margaret continued. "They decided I didn't look like someone who could run a successful airline. They were wrong, obviously, but their assumptions hurt. They delayed my dream by years, and I promised myself that if I ever did succeed, I would build a company where people weren't judged by superficial things, where everyone was given a fair chance." She stopped walking and looked directly at Donna. "So when you looked at me today and decided I didn't belong in first class, you weren't just being rude to a random passenger. You were violating the very foundation of everything I built this company to be." Donna's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Chen, I honestly am. I thought I was doing my job. I thought I was protecting the company from fraud." "I believe you," Margaret said, and she meant it. "I don't think you were trying to be malicious. But that's what makes this even more concerning. You genuinely believed that what you were doing was right, which means we've failed to teach you what actually matters." James spoke up for the first time since they'd entered the room. "Ms. Chen, if I may, I think part of the problem is that we've been so focused on metrics and efficiency that we've lost sight of the human element. We track everything, on-time departures, baggage handling, ticket processing speed. But we don't track compassion. We don't measure kindness." "That's very true," Richard added. "I've been reviewing our training materials, and they're all about procedures and protocols. We teach people how to process tickets and handle complaints, but we don't teach them how to see each passenger as a complete human being with their own story. Margaret nodded. That needs to change. But the question is, how do we change it? Firing Donna and Trevor would be easy. It would send a message. But would it actually solve the problem? The two employees looked up sharply, hope and fear mixing on their faces. I've thought about this a lot over the years, Margaret continued. Every time I encounter a situation like this, and unfortunately it happens more often than I'd like, I have to decide between punishment and education. Sometimes punishment is necessary. Sometimes people are so set in their ways or so lacking in empathy that they simply can't change. But I don't think that's the case here. She pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, her posture more relaxed now. Donna, Trevor, I'm not going to fire you today, but I am going to require something from you that might be harder than being fired. They both leaned forward, paying absolute attention. For the next 2 months, you're both going to work different positions within the airport. Trevor, you'll spend a week in baggage handling, then a week as a wheelchair assistant, then a week cleaning the planes between flights. Donna, you'll do the same, plus additional time shadowing our customer service recovery team. Trevor looked confused. I don't understand. Why would you want us to do those jobs? Because until you understand what it's like to be invisible, to be the person nobody pays attention to or thanks, you won't fully understand what you did wrong today, Margaret explained. The baggage handlers, the cleaners, the assistants, they're essential to our operation. But how often do passengers even look at them? How often do we acknowledge them? But what about our regular positions? Donna asked. Who will cover for us? We'll manage, James said firmly. Consider this an intensive retraining program. You'll still be paid your regular salary, but you're going to learn our business from the ground up. And after those 2 months, Margaret continued, you'll come back to your current roles, but with a new assignment. You're going to help redesign our customer service training program. Because who better to teach others about the mistakes we make than people who have made them and learned from them? The surprise on their faces was evident. This was not the outcome either of them had expected. You're giving us a second chance, Trevor said slowly as if he couldn't quite believe it. I'm giving you an opportunity to become better, Margaret corrected. Whether you take it or not is up to you. If you go through this experience and come out the other side still treating people based on their appearance, still making the same assumptions, then, yes, you'll be terminated. But I have a feeling that won't happen. I think you're both going to learn something valuable. Donna wiped her eyes. Thank you, Ms. Chen. I promise you won't regret this. Don't thank me yet, Margaret said with a slight smile. Cleaning planes is hard work, and I'm going to be checking in on your progress regularly. This isn't a vacation. Richard stood up. Mom, we should probably let you catch your flight. It's going to board soon. Actually, Margaret said, I think I'm going to take a later flight. There's something else I need to do first. She turned to James. Can you arrange for me to speak with some of the other airport staff? I'd like to hear their perspectives on how we can improve. Of course, James said. I'll set it up right away. Margaret stood and addressed Donna and Trevor one final time. You can go now. Report to James's office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., and he'll get you started on your new assignments. Use the rest of today to think about what happened and what you learned. They both stood, still looking somewhat dazed. As they reached the door, Trevor turned back. Ms. Chen, can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you fly anonymously? Why don't you let people know who you are? Margaret considered the question. Because the moment people know who I am, they change. They become careful, conscious of being watched. I don't want to see the performance. I want to see the reality. How can I improve our airline if I only ever see the version of it that people present to the boss? Trevor nodded slowly. That makes sense. And it's kind of brilliant, actually. After they left, Margaret, Richard, and James sat in silence for a moment. You handled that well, Richard said finally. I'm not sure I could have been so patient. Patience is easier. When you've been on the receiving end of judgment, Margaret replied. Besides, being angry doesn't solve the problem, it just makes you feel better temporarily. Still, James said, this is going to require significant changes across all our airports. What happened today is probably happening elsewhere too. I know, Margaret agreed. Which is why we're going to implement some new programs. First, I want to establish a mystery passenger initiative. We'll have people from all backgrounds fly our routes and report on their experiences. And we need to completely overhaul our training. Richard was already making notes on his phone. What else? I want to start a mentorship program. Pair experienced staff with newer employees, but make it about values, not just procedures. And I want to create channels for passengers to share both positive and negative experiences more easily. Anonymous feedback that goes directly to senior management. Those are good ideas, James said. But they're going to take time to implement. All meaningful change takes time, Margaret said, but we have to start somewhere. They talked for another 30 minutes, sketching out plans and ideas. By the time they finished, Margaret felt cautiously optimistic. What had started as a frustrating experience was turning into an opportunity for real improvement. When she finally left the conference room, she found the gate area much quieter. The flight she had originally been booked on had departed. Grace and Harold were gone. So was Amy with her children. But Daniel, the college student, was still there, sitting with his new first-class boarding pass in his hand, staring at it like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Margaret walked over to him. "How are you doing, Daniel?" He looked up and she saw tears in his eyes. "I'm okay, I wasn't expecting kindness today. Not after the morning I had, and what you did for me." His voice broke. "Sometimes kindness comes when we need it most," Margaret said gently. She sat down next to him. "Tell me about your grandmother." And so Daniel did. He told her about a woman who had raised him when his parents couldn't, who had worked as a seamstress for 50 years, who had taught him that hard work and integrity mattered more than money or status. He told her about how she had encouraged him to